welcome everybody. As many of you know, and for those who don't, my name is Jo Garofalo. I am the FASD lead advisor for the FASD Hub in Scotland. And we are delighted that you have joined us for this Wednesday webinar with Dr. Jacquie Pei, talking about towards healthy outcomes. Jacquie is a professor in the School and Clinical Child Psychology Programme and Assistant Clinical Director in the Department of Paediatrics at the University of Alberta. She began her career as a criminologist and forensic counsellor working with incarcerated youth. She's done so much work in the field of FASD, supporting families, leading research. She's had over 150 peer-reviewed publications and reports. I was lucky enough myself to meet her in person at a conference, and was inspired and motivated in my parenting journey, but also in my professional role, and really wanted her to be able to come and speak to our community. And luckily, she agreed. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jacquie Pei and say good evening. Thank you for joining us. She's going to do a presentation for us, and we will be going through some of the pre-submitted questions at the end of today's session, but also please feel free to submit any questions that you have in the chat throughout today's presentation. Both our service managers lead, Barbara Ogston, and myself will be monitoring those and adding those to anything else that we already have. We have a huge amount of pre-submitted questions too, so hopefully we can delve further into the things that people really want to know at the end of Jacquie's presentation. So thank you, Jacquie, and welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joanne. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for having me in. I will say good afternoon to you all, because yes, it really is a different time zone over here. Although similarly, it's cold. And I've already been complaining a lot today about the transition to the cold weather. I've decided I do not transition well. But anyway, not the point. So really, such a pleasure to be joining you all today, and I am really excited to talk to you a little bit about the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework that you see hopefully up on your screen now. And I'm going to, first of all, I told Joanne, I'm going to have the slides available to folks afterwards. And in the slides, you'll see there's some links and connection to the materials I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight, because I'm going to go fairly quickly, way too quickly, probably through this, because we don't have a lot of time. And I really appreciate questions and the conversation that comes at the end of this, because that's where we really make it relevant. We ensure that this is meaningful to you. A framework provides us with kind of a way of thinking, and we'll talk about what that way of thinking looks like and the rationale and some of the purposes of this framework. But I know that lots of you are going to have more specific questions about, well, how will this help me in this way? Or what would it mean like this? And I'd like to create lots of space for that. So what I'm saying is buckle up and hang on, and we'll leap right in and have lots of time for that kind of conversation at the end. So the front end is this Towards Healthy Outcomes framework. This is a document that is also available. So even as I go through all of this, if I will make sure you have access to the link. You can read it in more detail, and I can answer any questions you have if you've already had a look at it and have some questions about it. So let me jump in. Oh, we'll see if I can get my thing to advance. Oh, always technology. I was just complaining about technology and how it is just not my superpower. Okay. Before I start, I really like to acknowledge the large number of people who have been involved in the framework. And this doesn't even remotely do it justice, but I just want to note that this framework is not an initiative just by myself or even by a group. This has been a real community-based process of evolution and thinking in terms of how do we think about support and intervention in ways that are really meaningful, practical, evidence-informed. We had a long list, and what seems as a bit of an impossibility, we generated this framework. Individuals with FASD and their families have been instrumental throughout the process in terms of saying what is important, what do we need connection to, what sort of information. Community members, frontline service providers, educators, all sorts of folks who are engaging in this kind of work from their position of work, and others who have sought healthy outcomes in their lives and in the lives of their loved ones and in their communities. And so the input and the influence in this document has been significant, which is part of why this is a 2.0. And not a 1.0. And one day, guys, there will be a 3.0. And so even the conversations we have today, I was saying to Joanne, I always have a pen right next to me when we talk about this, because I make notes and I think things through, and you'll have my email at the end of the presentation as well, because this is, a very brief presentation. I'm going to throw some ideas. You guys are going to ask some questions. We'll have a little bit of conversation, but hopefully this is the beginning, not an end of a conversation. And I really think that when we talk about healthy outcomes and what it means to support individuals, families, and communities towards those healthy outcomes, it's about a conversation. There's no recipe card out there. There's no one-stop shopping. If this were easy, we wouldn't be here. This is an ongoing running dialogue, discussion, opportunity for us to think together, be creative together, and be responsive together. So we'll throw it out today, but just know that I invite right at the outset more conversation and feedback, because we will continue to evolve our thinking in this regard. So my goals, my hope today is I'm going to say, what is this towards healthy outcomes? What is it all about? Why do we do it? I'm going to walk you through the domains, which is going to feel a little bit like speed dating, but it'll give you a bit of an idea of what's present and what's available to you in the framework. And then we'll say a couple of things about how we can apply THO, but most of that's going to be the kind of conversation that we're going to have hopefully as a group, as we think about where and how you see this having some relevance and some possibility for you in your day-to-day functioning. All right, what is the Towards Healthy Outcomes framework? Well, Towards Healthy Outcomes was originated a number of years ago. I was tasked with saying, how do we actually start to think about intervention and FASD in a bit more of a systematic way, so that we can advance practice in a more collaborative and integrated fashion, so we can all kind of work towards some shared outcomes, and so that the evidence we gather can get stronger, so that we can feed that back into our communities, into our policy structures, into all these other places, so that we can fund and make sure they're accessible, good evidence and informed intervention. This was a challenging kind of call because, as we all know, FASD is really heterogeneous. This is a diverse and unique group of folks who live in diverse and unique families and diverse and unique communities all around the world. So how do we begin to do this? And I'll talk about, some of the decisions we made, but it was challenging. And yet we said, this matters. It's really important. For the real reasons that we wanted to do this was, number one, so we have a shared understanding, language, and philosophy. We said we need to be able to use the same kind of words, communicate in the same way. If I'm saying one thing and somebody else is saying the other thing, we're going to communicate, we're going to confuse folks who we're trying to convince, or folks that we're trying to bring on board. And if we don't look like we're talking about the same story, immediately it sort of starts to fall apart, particularly if we're trying to influence systems of support, professionals, governments, etc. In that same way, we increase consistency and intentionality in our goal setting. We begin to say, what are reasonable goals? What does it mean to set a goal? A goal towards what? And how do those goals start to align with the research and the possibility for that individual? The framework offers us opportunities to streamline the links between research and practice. So often research is way behind practice. The things that you guys are doing in the community, the solutions that you're finding in real time, are often way ahead of our research efforts. And so the more we can do to link this and help research get closer to practice, so you don't have to wait years for the research to get out, and help the research be informed by your practice. So what are you guys doing in the community? We start to create a conversation that can accelerate the evolution of our practice, so that we're increasingly doing those things that contribute to the desired outcomes that we have. So the closer we can bring these, the better. And a framework gives us a way to do it. It gives us somewhere to hang that research evidence and associate it with some of the practical implications, and even generate some of the questions that we might have for future research, all in one place, one-stop shopping, so to speak. It also creates opportunities for integration by identifying the range and scope and approach to intervention. We can start to say, here's where these things come together. We can talk about collaborative service delivery or integrated service delivery all the time, but we don't always map it in a way that allows people to see where they sit within their system of support and how that might operate. Once we start to see an opportunity for integration, we can also begin to advocate and lobby our systems to increase the ability to share information and create space, time for that collaborative work together. And so these are some of the reasons why we needed to do it. So why healthy outcomes? Why did we select that as really our overarching goal? So when I talk about intentional goals, we thought we're going to pick healthy outcomes as our goal. Why? Well, actually, this came largely from caregivers in our community and folks with FASD who really said to us, we want the emphasis to be on healthy living and quality of life. We don't want our entire story to be about risks to avoid, problems to solve, challenges to deal with. We want to be more than the sum of our challenges. Families and caregivers said we want people to see our loved ones as something more than a problem, a difficulty, or a challenge to be solved. And so they really advocated for us shifting our lens away from solving problems or addressing challenges specifically or only towards pursuing healthy outcomes. That then challenges us to move away from just remediating deficits or difficulties and actually starting to say, well, what would be your goal be? What would a quality of life look like? Where are you trying to get in your life? Changes our conversation, allows us to see the human being first, the person first, and then we can think about the modifications and adaptations or supports that can help that human being navigate their unique pathway. It starts to shift our framework, our philosophy and our approach to providing support. This puts us in a position where we can start saying, okay, when we set these goals, my goal is to complete high school. I want to get through school. Then we might say, okay, what are appropriate expectations? High school at what level? What stream? Here in Canada, we operate with lots of different educational streams, and I'm sure there are some variations and differences that you might have as well. So completing high school can be a lot of different things for a lot of different people, and we can set some goals and expectations that are well suited for folks should that be a goal that they hold. And that's very different than saying, I don't want you to drop out of school. I want you to complete school is a goal. I don't want you to drop out of school is not really a goal. It's a thing to avoid. So shifting our language, which implies I want to do some things that will keep you in school or support you in experiencing success in school. But we're going to do that with that goal of completion in mind and start thinking about what it would mean to work towards that. This shifts how we think about individuals, systems, ourselves, as we start to think about what our role in space is in contributing to the navigation towards goals. How do we get there? How would we do things differently? What's the workaround? What's the opportunity? What's a barrier? How do we remove that barrier? All of a sudden, this becomes central to our conversation in working towards a goal. This is where healthy outcomes has been situated and what it hopes to promote and support. A number of core ideas are central to the Healthy Outcomes Framework. It adopts a developmental lifespan perspective, again, operating from the space of human being. We all develop, we all grow, we all evolve across our lifespan. We operate first and foremost from that space. Individuals with FASD will grow, evolve, age, all of these things. That framework is really important to start with. We also think about a strength-based and empowered approach. That means we're balancing the storyline. We're recognizing that everybody comes with strengths and abilities and capacities. When we empower folks, when we construct systems of support that make sense, then we create opportunities for individuals to best access their areas of strength, experience success, and make progress towards those goals that they hold. We also hold, as I've kind of referred to already, this idea that interactive systems are really important. I find you're going to get a little bit of Jacquie bias in here now and again, guys, and maybe things are really different there. But certainly here, I find that sometimes it's not the individual where the barriers reside, it's the systems of support. And sometimes not a lot of understanding, some rigidity in our systems, difficulty communicating between systems, the need to constantly convince people of the kinds of supports that are important, create the biggest barriers, and looking towards how we can meaningfully message to our systems of support what it means to be interactive, integrated, and providing these well-suited environments is really important. And I think sometimes our research evidence helps do that, because then, although I think caregivers often have a great read on things, sometimes research evidence substantiates that. It provides a little beef to that, where we can say, no, no, there's science that supports the idea that these systems need to work together in order to promote outcomes, these healthy outcomes. Central to these philosophies is this idea that all behavior is functional. This does not mean functional for me or necessarily functional for you. It means functional for that person who's exhibiting that behavior. So as we employ these philosophies and we think of folks through a developmental lens from a strength-based and empowered way, and we look at the way systems are interacting and influence that person, we're always thinking about, if an individual is engaging in a way that doesn't always make sense, maybe is disruptive, maybe is problematic, what is that behavior communicating to me? What is that communicating about their developmental needs, about the fact that perhaps we're failing to empower or engage strengths in a meaningful way? Maybe systems are creating barriers because somehow that behavior that may seem disruptive to any of these processes is actually still serving a need for that person. And in serving that need, it's communicating to us that we are not engaging with these kinds of goals in a way that's serving this person or created this well-suited kind of space. Working from that helps us to begin to think maybe a little bit differently, become a little bit more detectives in the work that we're doing to understand. Doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean understanding leads immediately to resolution. Brains don't work that way. It takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, and a lot of process. But it does mean that when we think about behavior as functional, then we see this person as just like you and me, simply trying to navigate a world that doesn't always make sense. They're trying to experience success. They're trying to work towards something. We need to better understand them so that we can respond to their developmental needs, access those strengths, and adjust systems to be the right fit for them. So those are just some of the kind of premises or ideas that we've integrated throughout the document. There's more writing about them in there. I could go on. I'm trying to be succinct. I think sometimes when I try to be short, I get long. I don't know how that works. It's a Jackie thing. Bear with me. But these are just some of the ideas that I'll happily discuss some questions about. In the all behavior is functional, just another unpack we do sometimes is to think about how anything we observe is usually a combination. So if somebody's behavior in any way, shape, or form is often a bit of a combination between the intent of that behavior and the utility of that behavior. Is it useful and what do I intend? Some behavior has very little intention. It might be highly reactive. Doesn't mean it doesn't have utility. Protective, reactive behavior that's there to support, security or personal safety sometimes can be very useful, gets me out of a situation that's provoking a lot of stress. There may not be as much intent, or certainly not as much conscious intent involved in that. So the combination of intent to utility can be very different for the behavior, but ultimately those two pieces often present, contributing to that observed behavior, what we see, puts us in a position to say, okay, wait a minute, what do I know about the intent and the utility of that behavior before I think about what it might mean to respond? And that can relate to anything. That can relate to learning, that can relate to navigating daily demands, that can relate to emotional control, that can relate to social interactions. In any way, those things that I observe that an individual is working through as they strive towards some of their developmental goals, if there are barriers or things I notice, then thinking a little bit about what those contributors might look like might equip us to think a bit differently. And that's what some of our research is beginning to tell us. It's trying to help us unpack those pieces a little bit more too, which can hopefully continue to inform the opportunities or the ideas available to us as we generate opportunities to move forward from that behavior and increase the adaptive value, not just the utility of that behavior for the individual. Okay, that's like the preamble, just to sort of lay it down and say, these are some of the core ideas that are present throughout. They are unpacked within the domains, and we think about them in a bit more of an applied level as we go forward a bit more. And certainly in our conversation, we'll take them even to a more applied level. But those are some of the overarching ideas that permeate a lot of the work that we've done. So what are the domains? Like, why I keep talking about domains and showed you that visual at the outset, but what are we talking about and what does this look like? Again, the domains are based on developmental domains. They're derived from healthy development. So every domain that we cover is the same for you, me, and anybody. These are things that are important to our development and to healthy outcomes for all of us. As we go through these domains, we'll talk about what things we know about how some of these factors, how FASD might influence things like physical well-being, things that we might do or supports that might be helpful, and also some things that we might want to plan for. You'll notice as you look at the towards healthy outcomes that down the center line, we have, a little one at the bottom, an infant, all the way through to a senior adult. Um, this is trying to reflect the developmental course for individuals. As you get further up towards those adults, certainly those arms or the somebody once called it a rib cage, and I'm like, wow. They said it's like a backbone and a rib cage. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I could see it. But those are become, developmentally a little bit more sophisticated as you go forward. But they're all always relevant. So even in infancy, where you are in that moment is to some degree a product of where you were even the brief little bit of time before. So some of your history influences you, and you're also influenced by things yet to come because that relates to how we plan, how we anticipate, and what goals we're going to set. So at any stage, we're always interested in not only where you might be at a given time, but all of these domains are either things that can have been a part of my life or part of who I am right now, or will be a part of who I'm going to be in the future. All of this comes together to influence who I am today, the goals I'm setting today, the decisions that I'm making today, and those around me are supporting in. So all of these domains are relevant at all ages and stages. So even though they sit in sort of a developmental sequencing, it's not a prioritization and it's not an either or storyline. They all integrate into the center. And just as the human person is connected to us as infants all the way through our lives, so too these domains of development should be connected. Within the THO framework, like I said, we set up the things to know, things to do, and things to plan for. I am going to walk us quite rapidly through this. And if there are domains that you're interested or you want to hear more about, they are going to be all available for your reading with links, and lots of them have additional information available to you that provides a little bit more detail around the things you might know, do, or plan for. So right now, what I'm giving you is sort of the overview look at things in order to make some time for our conversation. Starting with physical well-being, this is the kind of information that we might provide around physical well-being in terms of what it's important to know and understand. Some of it is contextualized, again, in this basic humanity, that physical health is fundamental to all of us and our overall well-being. This is just a fundamental human element, part of who we are. But it also reminds us that things like FASD is a whole body diagnosis. It's about the brain and the body, that there are higher rates of health concerns for folks with FASD, that the brain and the body and the environment actually interact, and that these interactions have significant implications for that observed behavior. So a lot of that function might be seen in that interaction, and that early and continued support for physical health is really important for individuals with FASD, as it is for all of us. This information is parsed out more in the guide, and there's more provided. But we hope that having this information also provides you with a communication aid. And as you talk about this and communicate with people, having resources and having data and evidence to support it can sometimes help support as your argument or your case or your advocacy or just your communication as you talk to service providers or those in your community as you're seeking support. Some of the things that we talk about doing when we think about physical well-being and the information that's provided, some relates to medication. On the right, you see a visual of an algorithm, the medication algorithm that's been produced by Dr. Mansfield Mella, helps for physicians to navigate medication decision-making for folks with FASD, can be a useful resource. That kind of information is present in the guide, bringing that research into an applied space. Other things that we speak to are the importance of sleep, motor skill development, dental care is new and something that is being spoken about quite a bit now, nutritional well-being, sensory supports, all of the information associated with intervention to support these kinds of things. Development in these areas is provided, and the current evidence that's present that says these are some of the areas that we really need to be tuned into, paying attention to, and responding to as early as we can. Also identify things to plan for. So depending on the age and stage of your kiddo or the person in your life, we talk about ongoing monitoring, particularly around health needs, highlighting the fact that many health needs onset earlier than we might see in typically developing populations. And so even talking to pediatricians or docs that are used to serving much younger people, we might be saying, we actually need to watch for things like arthritis in kids, not just waiting until you're a much older adult. So acknowledging and highlighting the early onset of those health conditions is one of those things that we can monitor and speak to in this framework. Otherwise, information, for example, related to sexual health is provided so that we can be proactive, planning forward, and thinking about it in a natural and supportive way, as opposed to a frightened and sometimes reactive way. Not unusual for any of us raising kids, but certainly one of those topics that's important to have in our conversation early as we can. The second domain is related to attachments and relationships. As far as I'm concerned, guys, if I had to pick a favorite domain, this would probably be it. I think that if there's one thing that for all humans carries the most potency for intervention, support, and a healthy outcome, it's that relationship piece and formation of a healthy and secure attachment. It lays the foundation for so many things, so many of the interventions or the intervention evidence that's been gathered in the FASD community, other developmental disability communities, and just in general within support communities, highlights the central role of a healthy relationship, a secure relationship, a supported relationship in all processes of growth, healing, development, and on it goes. So I really think this is a potent one, and particularly important when we think about how we support our caregivers, because the more we can nourish those who are providing relationships, we want to create these nested relational supports so that caregivers may provide direct support to folks with FASD, but then who's supporting our caregivers, and then who's supporting them. And the more these relationship networks are formed, the better strength we have. It's sort of those webs that we can create in order to bear the most weight and best support our successful trajectory and advancement towards our goals. Attachment, we talk a little bit about just the natural elements of attachment. This is another human element. It talks about life bonding and experiences with caregivers, how important the home environment is, the role that it plays at every stage in development. So even though we talk a lot about attachment in little kiddos, it doesn't disappear in teens or later adults. Attachment and relationships are part of our entire lifespan and remain central and critical to those healthy outcomes. Certainly within relationships and attachment, we talk again about the link between brain-based differences, stressors, and adversity, and how that can impact attachment, how sometimes attachment can look and feel different in individuals with those brain-based differences because the attachment patterns might shift, and how we shift to remain responsive and engage in that really reciprocal interaction that's important for attachment formation and relationship, sometimes requires adaptation on our part, given the unique brain of the individual we might be interacting with. So attachment, I love it. I could talk about relationships forever, trying to move on. See, I get too excited, guys, and then we start getting distracted. Attachment and relationships, we talked a lot about, different therapeutic approaches that have been employed and found to be effective for folks with FASD. And this is an area that continues to be studied and researched. Talk about things like, for example, caseworker or others, folks that are part of services and supports. In Canada, we have a real overrepresentation of kiddos with FASD within our children's services system. So we focus on that system in particular when we say that stability of things like a caseworker role can be instrumental and really impactful for a kiddo who needs that stability and whose brain is going to grow and thrive best with at least a few stable people in their life, even if there's other things that are a little bit more out of our control and tumultuous. Responding to caregiver needs, creating opportunities for family cohesion, lots of respite, lots of additional supports and wraparound families. And this can apply to all ages. We know there are a lot of caregivers that provide caring supports at all ages of care for their loved ones, and how we continue to support folks beyond the magical ages of adulthood as set in our countries. Caring doesn't stop because somebody becomes legally an adult. Support doesn't stop when we hit those thresholds. So communicating the lifelong nature of FASD and the opportunity to work towards healthy outcomes when we can maintain and sustain supports across the lifespan, really important. Along these lines, we highlight the importance of responding to change and proactive planning towards continued support and adaptation and working into adulthood. And we have later domains that even address that more directly when we think about things like employment or housing. We also have links to a lot of existing guides and resources that can be helpful. So for example, there's a resource guide for caregivers of individuals with FASD that was produced a number of years ago. Dr. Dorothy Badlery put this together, and it's a lovely resource that provides some important information. If you haven't seen it yet, links like this are available, and often we will be updating them as we update different iterations as we learn more and can update all of the resources that are attached to this framework. Social competency is the next domain that we talk about. And again, identifying the importance of social competency for all of us, and then looking at how social competency may be influenced or impacted for folks with FASD, affecting maybe language and communication skills, emotional regulation, social cue recognition, that can influence the ability to form relationships and mediate that social environment. We also highlight the fact that there are also a lot of social strengths that have been identified for folks with FASD, and that interpersonal relationship and belonging can be highly motivating for folks with FASD, just as it is for all of us. This provides us an opportunity to think how we can work to that strength within a safe and supported context. We provide sometimes some explicit guidance around how, for example, you might adapt language to be a little bit more concrete as opposed to abstract. So often our language is so very abstract and very inferential. And so just little changes that can sometimes seem like nothing can actually have a really significant impact. Caregivers actually provided this and offered this as this is their expertise and wisdom, saying, hey guys, like little changes go a really long way. And that's why even when we sit in a space of shifting our philosophy, it can be really valuable, because sometimes when we shift our philosophy and we say, okay, what's the function here? If they're not understanding, then confusion generates a very different behavior. So what little tweaks can I make in my communication and language that might facilitate improved understanding and generate different behavioral outcomes, which then can help us work towards our desired goals? Mental wellness, another category, another domain, pardon me, in our framework. Here we talk a lot about what is mental wellness, what is mental health, how do we think about it? We identify some of the risks and challenges that might be present for individuals with FASD, but also the opportunities and successes that are possible. We acknowledge that folks with FASD experience much more mental health needs than the general population, but that we can support these needs and experience some success in doing so. We also think about some of the concerns that have been identified around suicidality and adopt some new ways of thinking about it, talking about life promotion, so that we're not only sitting in our risk and our fear and our concern, but also thinking about what are those contributions that actually can promote living, promote life, promote strength, and take us in an alternative direction. So again, we're operating from that big philosophical framing, even when we're thinking about suicidality. This doesn't mean we're not addressing risk, concerned about risk, and responding to risk. It means that we're not sitting exclusively in the risk. We're thinking about, if we want to address suicidality, certainly we will be thinking about safety and impulse control and all those things. But we're also going to think about what life promotion looks like and what it means to feel good about yourself, experience success, know about times when you're not experiencing this, and how we can generate more times when you feel better. It's just a slight shift in creating a balanced storyline. We identify and talk a little bit about stigma and the impact of stigma in terms of mental wellness, and how reframing the way we talk about and think about FASD can really influence the way we generate insights and even respond to the different needs that folks may present with. All of these things are identified in terms of some of the supports and recommendations that are coming out of the evidence right now around things like emotional awareness, regulation, stigma, substance misuse, and life promotion. You'll see in this link again on life promotion resource, if anyone is interested. It's lovely, and it's really interesting the way our Métis Nation here in Alberta has reframed our thinking around this. In terms of substance misuse, we acknowledge that absolutely this is an area of concern, and we do need to have some targeted support available. We link folks to a guide that provides FASD-informed substance use treatment wisdom for service providers in this area. So these resources are made available. So even as we address and work towards healthy outcomes and balance our perspectives, we are trying to put in the hands of the professionals the kind of resources that allow us to address those challenges and remove those barriers so that we can continue to make progress towards our goals. Education, big area that we talk a lot about, what skills learning and education can look like and what could be different for folks with FASD, and how we begin to build goals and work forward, how we leverage interactive and applied hands-on skills identified for folks with FASD within our educational context. We talk a lot about assessment for intervention, which is really how we can gain better understanding of the individual so that we can use that understanding to create unique intervention opportunities. What kind of interventions have been successful? Interestingly, even within educational settings, some of the interventions that we see the best evidence for are those that are interactive and predicated on a strong relationship. Really interesting kinds of findings. Transition planning, when to reassess, how to continue supporting kids in evolving understandings is one of the things that we've sort of situated within our ideas around education and skill building across the lifespan. Identity, another domain that's identified is, and this domain actually was first named and suggested for the Towards Healthy Outcome by folks with FASD who said, hang on, I want there to be something about how I see myself and how I think about myself, because that's really important to how I set my goals and how I can advocate for myself and how I can engage in pursuing those goals. And so this section introduces a large number of wonders and questions that are evolving. Identity and how folks see themselves is continuing to evolve in our work with folks with FASD, how we can promote healthy sense of self, self-esteem, confidence, for folks and with folks with FASD is addressed within this. How to set goals, how to address stigma, recognition of your culture as that may be appropriate, sexual and gender identity, self-expression and self-perception. Recognizing that identity also evolves across the lifespan allows us to see how who I see myself as and how I might define myself is going to continue to evolve. So this remains a topic of consideration and something that's really important for us to bring to the table, particularly as we want to empower and work with individuals with FASD, not for them. Interdependence, this is where we really start to blend ideas around adaptive functioning and community engagement. Interdependence creates space to say, how do we experience success navigating day-to-day expectations with a certain amount of autonomy, a certain amount of opportunity for growth and individual decision-making, but also with some support and some assistance, because remove all my supports and sometimes things get really difficult and I run into trouble. creating sort of this balance between how I can build adaptive skills and the kinds of community engagement depending on my own skill set helps to balance this out and say, how much support do I need? How much skill do I have? How much skill am I building? So that we can continue to evolve that construction. We really situate the idea of interdependence as not unique to FASD, but rather something all of us do. Many of us would recognize that we couldn't navigate our lives or our day-to-day expectations without some kind of support. My car breaks down, I need a mechanic. I'm pooped. Frankly, I wouldn't even eat well if not for my husband, who is an amazing cook. So there are lots of things that occur in my life because of the support people in my life who together we work to create some balance and allow for success. In some places and spaces, and for some folks, that success is going to be a lot, that support part of me is going to be a lot higher in order to support success. The other important part about interdependence is it's a two-way street. So just as I'm going to support somebody and help them to bridge any gaps that they may experience in navigating day-to-day demands, I'm also going to identify how they're going to support me, because I can't just give. They need to have a responsibility too. So perhaps that support is relational, perhaps it's effective, perhaps it is encouraging, perhaps it is in a task that really makes sense for that individual. Whatever the case, everybody needs a role, everybody needs a purpose and an opportunity to contribute. And that's where we start seeing how autonomy and support balance out as we incorporate adaptive skills and community engagement. Things like practical skills, goals, engagement, I talked about all this. Developmental transitions are things to plan for as we go forward, and how we find our village and our networks of support. Employment can look like a lot of the different things for a lot of folks. Sometimes it's supported, sometimes it's volunteer, sometimes it's competitive, many different opportunities. It too is a place and space where folks can have meaning and purpose, feel belonging, keep busy, see their strengths realized. We provide a link to an employment guide within the Healthy Outcomes Framework so that we say, what does it mean for us to support and create opportunity for folks with FASD to experience employment success? How do we work through the barriers? How do we create these opportunities? How do we keep this on the radar? How do we talk about this even at a young age? So my expectation isn't that you won't work. My question is, how will you work? What will work look like for you? Not, are you going to work or should you work? How are you going to work? What might that look like? Changes the space that we might hold. Never too early to get into it. Think about job fit into the future and how we might navigate relationships to do so. Housing, fundamental human right. How does that look? How could we make that successful for individuals? We know that with some support and in the right context, folks with FASD, of course, can maintain housing as can anyone else if the fit is correct. We provide a guide for housing supports that identify the broad range of approaches that housing that we might want to consider or be thinking about as we're planning forward, and creating sort of support frameworks around individuals for housing. So again, these are all going to be links that you can access and look at. We also identify the fact that folks with FASD may choose to become parents. And what does that look like? Having FASD does not mean you cannot be a parent, nor should it mean that. And there's many strengths that folks with FASD could bring to parenting. However, like with anything, they're not alone. And as we say, it takes a village, and that village may need to be a little bit more intentional, thoughtful, proactive, and considered as we wrap around and think about what that means for folks with FASD. That information is also kind of provided and identified. The older we get, the less information we have. We are starting more and more to collect information from folks who are adult with FASD so that we can better populate some of this employment and housing and parenting elements of the guide. But it's coming, and we're getting there. So how can we apply THO? I'm going to turn us to questions right away and open the floodgates here, and Joanne will kind of open us. But I just want to highlight that, one of the exciting things for me about this framework has been how different people have used it and realize the opportunity, be it in developing and shaping policy, to the way that they're setting goals for an individual, to a mechanism to facilitate communication, a research guide. It's been used in many different ways. Some of those are articulated, but there are a number of questions that I leave with you as we go to a discussion and think about what it might mean for you to dip into this, in addition just to getting more information, thinking about how that could look for you. So in the PowerPoint, you'll also see that my email's present. And like I said, I'll send it to Joanne's way shortly so that you have all of these links available to you.
Thank you
And
so much, Jackie. Thank you. Oh my God, it was amazing. It's like I was like taking notes on things that you said, because obviously I've been privy to have like insight into towards that healthy outcomes presentations previously, and I've used it in my own work and in my personal life. But I love the life promotion and success. I love that, just that statement, particularly for the families we work with, because I think very often it's so easy for people to be entrenched in the bad and to think about the negative. And I just think from very early on my journey, I became very aware. And luckily for me, I became engaged with families who were very much find the brilliance of your child, concentrate on that, and you know, scaffold that with functional skills. So I was writing down the key things for me before I ask you questions, which were life promotion and success was a good one. The other one, interdependence, which I use all the time. And even with my own 14-year-old daughter, I talk about the fact that I'm not independent because somebody has to empty my bins and somebody has to fix my car. And, you know, and I use it very much in that sort of small concept for her. And also stability for care experienced kids was, I don't think it's probably been presented to me before, but tonight became like a big thing based on the fact that we are Adoption UK. And so very much the families that come to us are very often adoptive, kinship, foster, special guardianship. So we work primarily with those sorts of families who we are obviously aware are in that bracket of people who have young people who are more likely to be exposed to alcohol in utero. So I thought that was like really interesting for us as an organization to think about using that terminology when we're going forward about how important it is for stability. I think it was the stability word. But we have had questions and I have questions. So I'm going to start with the questions that have been put in the chat, and then I'll go to the ones that were pre-submitted. So one of the questions was just from somebody who said, just checking my thinking. I've always been told that behavior is a form of communication and we need time and curiosity to understand what is being communicated.
Yeah, I see that. That's Jeff. Jeff, I completely agree. And, you know, I think a lot of times with our folks with FASD, you know, their brains have developed uniquely. And that means the way that they're processing information, interpreting their environment, making sense of things, not even getting into some of the environmental influences and impacts. So sometimes the way that they're communicating or expressing their needs, I sometimes think of it as getting lost in translation. And so it kind of puts us into that space. So I would agree with your thinking. And I think that doesn't mean that the behavior and the difficulties are acceptable, but it does mean they're communicating. And it's about reframing our kiddos as actually trying and as communicating and as effortful, not as bad and willful and oppositional, because I don't really think those things apply. Very, very rarely. And much more often, we have folks who are really struggling to experience success. And a lot of time, even their dysregulation and frustration associates with the fact that they feel they can't even manage to navigate the world in a meaningful way to make us happy and feel that belonging. So that is a big contributor. So Jeff, I could go on, but I agree.
Yeah. I totally agree. Christina just sort of made a comment. So with mental health, we push the positive side with our kid. So things like praising for talking and explaining why it's good for doing it, rather than saying, I know you feel sad, let's talk. So your
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah, no, I really love, catching the positive, and depending on the context and the situation. I mean, sometimes feeling sad is great. And I don't mean I want people to feel sad, but sometimes we feel sad because we care. We feel sad because something matters. We feel sad because we're sensitive. And so we can see that and hear that and say, you know what? You're talking, you're sharing that sadness. So these things matter, and I think you're right. It's not about denying the emotion. It's about acknowledging the emotion, but also kind of recognizing the bigger context and what sometimes that emotion might mean or represent, which is often we're emotional about things we care about. If we don't care, we don't often have a lot of emotion. And so right away we have sort of a stepping in point. Christina, I'm going to add one other thing that I failed to mention during the presentation. But for folks who are here and are interested in the mental health stuff, there's also a link in the framework, and also I can make it available to a mental health tool guide that provides a lot of in-depth information, not only around mental health as it relates to folks with FASD, but is actually really great for folks who might provide counseling or mental health services, to provide them with a bit of context about how I might adapt or accommodate some of the supports so that I can create a bit more of a well-rounded story and navigate some of the communicational gaps that might occur. So
Yeah,
um,
I've seen that. It's excellent.
oh, good, awesome.
Um, there's another question that I think often we hear from families who first come into our service, and sometimes I think it is just when you first are put into that world of FASD and you Google. So is it true that the life expectancy of someone with FASD is significantly reduced than the general population?
Yeah, we don't have good evidence for that right now. And yes, there have been things that come out, and we certainly acknowledge that there are some risks and some spaces where we see numbers overrepresented. And so we're aware of that, but do we know absolutely? Do we have really good longitudinal data? Or do we know that folks with FASD have experienced additional struggles and burdens because we failed to understand as systems of support, failed to get the right intervention on board? We aren't providing the kind of care. And I'm not talking to you guys, I'm talking to the systems of support here, right? So I think time will tell us that a little bit better. And the better we get at matching our supports to folks with FASD, I think we'll have a better picture. So I don't think that's a fair, absolute. So my answer would be, I think that's still an evolving question, but it's not a predetermined absolute.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I can remember when my daughter was diagnosed, and this is now, I don't know, quite a few years ago now. I don't know, maybe 6 years ago, 5 years ago. And there was no hub and there was nothing really going on in England. There still isn't a lot going on in England. And I can remember Googling, even though I'd already thought that that was what it was. But then, of course, once I got the diagnosis, I wanted to know more. And the first thing I saw was the life expectancy type things that are on Google. But then, as soon as I started getting education, I suddenly realized actually, I think this is maybe about if I parent with the right strategies and I have the right interventions and the right supports and get the supports for her in every area of her life, then we're likely to hopefully avoid the pitfalls that lead to secondary
Mhm.
comorbid type things that can happen by being unsupported. So that sort of gave me great hope, but I still today very often speak to families who have had newly diagnosed young people, and they're just at the start of their journey, and despite all the work going on across the world, there's still an awful lot of misinformation online, which leads to a lot of distress for families, I think, at the outset.
I think so. And I think anytime we get into these kind of predetermined mindsets, I mean, sometimes you can do everything right and things still go wrong. So we
Mm.
also can't own too much, all of you carers here. Like, it's things don't always kind of map perfectly. But the better we get and the more our system, informed our systems get, the better outcomes we'll get, and they're already getting and they will continue to get. So I do kind of resist sort of these, predetermined sense that inevitability of a problem, I think is problematic. I think if we set our sights on, oh, problems and this is all inevitable, well, that's the direction we're going to go in if that's what we're looking at. So I say, no, we're going to look towards healthy outcomes, because if that's what we're looking at, we're more likely to move in that direction. And I just want to comment really quick, because I know we're getting short, but Jackie, I see you made a comment about the fact that sometimes you know exactly what I'm talking about, but there's a lot of folks who don't. And a lot of people sometimes look at caregivers and say, oh, you're enabling, or you're making this too easy. And that's why sometimes I hope THO and other resources like it are helpful, because we try to provide the evidence that you can say, hey, look, it's not just me. Read this. Here's information about this. And it's not a big book. It's not an academic paper or any of these things. This is, an accessible guide that maybe can help to communicate and substantiate and say, hey, you're not making this up. So it's still a bit of work to get our systems on board, but I think that our failure to understand the way in which brains are so unique and can be so complex is one of the biggest barriers. I said it already today, but it's one of the biggest barriers to the success of our folks. So the more we can get on the same page, communicate in the same way, the louder our message gets, when we all are saying the same things.
Yeah, and I think the complexity of FASD is such a challenge for not only the individual but also for caregivers, especially when they're at the start of their journey. And I just think as we're coming to the end of the session, I'm very aware that we have a parent tonight online who's posted a question, and her daughter is 5 and was diagnosed 3 weeks ago, and she's at the very, very start of her journey and getting help and support. So it's all really new for her, and a real new learning curve. And more than anything, I would like her to go away with the view that all our children have brilliant parts of themselves. They all have talents, and they may not fit the traditional academic mode, and they may not go the traditional route, but as parents, it's not this life sentence that sometimes you first look at and think it is, and you can still have a really, really successful parent-child relationship, and they can have success as well. So I think before I ask, we're not going to have quite time to ask the millions of questions I have, but I would really like to leave Samantha with like a positive of this is a good
Yeah.
journey, although maybe difficult.
I mean, parenting is never easy and never predictable. We don't know what we're getting into. And, I always say parenting is the most amazing, greatest thing I've ever done, the hardest and, most, heart-wrenching thing I've ever done. This will be no exception. And the quality of your community and the supports that you've got around you like this, amazing. But I will say, I've worked now with kiddos with FASD for, over 20 years. I can't even think about how long it's been. It's been even longer than that. And Samantha, I think that in all the work I've done and all the people I've interacted with, I have been so impacted and influenced and transformed by my experiences with folks with FASD as some of the most intuitive and empathetic and connected and relational folks I've ever known. And it doesn't mean it was always easy, and it doesn't mean that everything always made sense. But I have really experienced the most personal growth in my life because of the influence of folks with FASD. So I genuinely think that the opportunity to raise a child with FASD, while it will come with challenge and you will want your support team, that it will also come with tremendous success, and the rewards will be rich and meaningful. And, I have talked to so many caregivers who said I wouldn't have it any other way. And so I just feel so gifted by those interactions. And I know you're not alone. And you've got my email now too, which means, even here in Canada, I'm cheering you on and happy to answer questions and be a support. And I just I do think that all our kids are a precious gift, and if we open our eyes to everything they have to offer all through the lifespan, it will be it will be so beautiful, and I really, really mean that, and I wish you the best with it. So there's my two thoughts, my two bits on that, Joanne.
Thank you. I think it's really important when you see questions like that to end on a positive, because we've all, you know, many of us have been there, like probably where she is, and you know that at that stage you don't know the journey you've got ahead of you, and it's quite scary, and you do need your community, you do need your tribe, you do need webinars, you do need places to go, and your friendships and your peer support changes, but it just results in success for your family, but it also creates a great community for you to allow you to feel empowered as a parent on a different journey, not the journey that every other parent may have with a neurotypical child, but nevertheless a great journey. So I am so sorry that I can't go through all the questions, but it is now past our time and we have to let Jacquie go, and we have to say a massive thank you for her joining us today. Thank you to everybody who came along. The slides, I believe, are all going to be sent out to everybody who came along. Feel free to drop the hub an email with any questions. I'm more than happy to send over stuff to Jacquie, and we can wait when she has time to maybe respond if there are any questions, or we might get some advice. But thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Take care of yourselves. Go and sit in the warm. And thank you for joining us once again for the Wednesday webinar. So good night all, and we will see you. Well, actually, we won't see you now till February, because we don't have webinars in December or January. We're having a couple of months off. So it will be like 2025. So have lovely Christmases and Happy New Year's, and we'll see you in 2025 for our next webinar.